So these are the results. You'll notice that there's some correlation between the versions. I was pretty sad to see that IE never improved anything in older versions. It's also worth pointing out that IE9, you will see that the times are even slower. And that may not be because IE9 is slow, but just because IE9 requires a different operating system that the others do. So the first three are running on XP, and IE9 is running on Vista. And they may have different virtualization performance, so the difference may be there, and not in the fact that IE is just slower. So you will see that when you use ID-based and name-based locators, CSS is like 2 orders of magnitude faster. We're talking about a tenth of a second versus 17 seconds to just find an element in the DOM. That's huge. Now, when we're talking about class and content, the difference is not that huge, but we're still talking about 5-6 seconds. We just can't make IE fast. That's the reality. We can do the best we can, and that is using CSS. I guess that's all we have for now. But I think numbers are good to see the difference first, but it's awesome to get the whole picture with something visual. So I made this page, the cat, and a button, and 1,000 nodes in it that are hidden. So the thing is that if you click on the button, the cat will move. And I made a test that just clicks on the button a lot of times, first using CSS and then using XPath, so you can really see difference. I actually ran it in Sauce Labs and made a video. I just got the video from it, but you can see that the workflow is pretty simple. Just open the page, click on it 20 times using CSS, then open it again to refresh the DOM just in case, and click on it again 20 times using XPath. I got the video offline just in case there was some internet problems. It's the same thing that you will see in the testing in Sauce Labs. So here, it's open IE9. I use IE9, you could use whatever. The difference is pretty big. So the page is just being loaded. It's going to check for the tail. I don't know why IE takes so long to come back from the open, but that's just waiting. As soon as the click starts, the cat will move. So those are the CSS clicks. Are almost instantaneous. There's also the fact that there's the internet in the middle between my test script and Sauce Labs, which adds like half a second more. Now the page refreshes, and this is the XPath version. Just open. So the clicks are already happening. My script already called Selenium saying, hey, find this button and click on it. And Selenium is like, okay, I'll find it. Hold on a second. And that is like 30 seconds. And it's going to take a while, but you'll eventually see it. Again, I got to point out, there's 1,000 nodes in that page. So it may take a while to parse the DOM. But nowadays, applications are getting complex enough. And UIs, there you go. So we'll wait for 5 more, and then the presentation's over. Nowadays applications are getting complex enough, and UIs are having so much elements and divs nested that actually 1,000 nodes is not such a crazy idea. So anyways, we can watch this for a while, but that's not the point. Again, CSS is faster. It's not super fast, but we're dealing with IE. It's just faster, so it's a good thing to keep in mind. Next point, I think they're more readable too. Oh, well, is it, do you want to go in a Q&A or?
I was going to ask relevant about the speed. So is it an issue with ID itself, or is it an issue that perhaps Selenium is not optimized or programmed?
That's a good question.
To interact with IE as well as the other browser?
So the question is IE the problem itself, or is that Selenium is not optimized to work with IE? The thing is, IE doesn't provide a JavaScript function for parsing the DOM with using CSS, either CSS or XPath. So other browsers, Selenium just leverages the available functions. They can do, hey browser, find me this element, and the browser will give it to you. With IE, you just gotta import a whole JavaScript library that will parse the DOM for you, parse your selector, and find the element using JavaScript. And we all know that IE with JavaScript is really slow anyways. That makes for a whole difference. I'm going to talk about Selenium 2 later, too. There's a big difference there. Anyways, why do I think it's more readable? Well, I just compared the basic locators both in the XPath and the CSS version. You will see that the XPath version of finding something by ID is this whole thing, chunk full of square brackets and ampersands and slashes. CSS was created with HTML as the core XML two parts. So we can prioritize some locators and say, everyone's going to be looking for IDs, so we should just create a magic word or something that will just give us the ID, and that's the hash brand here. Just use the hash brand. That means I want an element with this ID value. The same thing for class. It just uses a dot instead of having to specify I want an attribute named class and stuff. Now for attributes that are not ID or class, you can just still use square brackets, but it saves you from using the quotes and the ampersand and stuff. Now when you don't know the tag, instead of just using an asterisk, you don't use anything. That means all tags. So it's even smaller there. And when you nest them, it's even better. For XPath, of course, you gotta use all this all these slashes, whether you want to make it relative or not. And CSS, you just put a space, and that means relative nesting. So one of the most important reasons, I think, is that jQuery uses CSS as its locating strategy. Sorry. So why do I feel that's so important? Well, you can't see this, but it says that jQuery nowadays is being used on over 30% of the web. That is a lot of websites. That is a lot of developers that can read and write CSS locators. And that's a lot of users testing Cecil, which is a CSS parsing engine that jQuery uses and Selenium uses too. So that's a lot of testers. That's a lot of knowledge around CSS that nowadays in XPath really isn't anymore. So I felt that's really important. There's going to be a lot of people that will be able to maintain your test, read your locators pretty quickly, and just improve them if they have to. And the last reason is because I just think no one else uses XPath anyways. I actually, in the Selenium conference, I met a guy that did know XPath a lot. That guy worked for a backend company that did credit card charges, so all they did was XML. All I could say to him is, like, sorry about that. Now, having that said, that we all agree that CSS is the best thing to do, let's take a look at how it works and how to write your own CSS locators. So the basics are, if you want to select a tag, you just put the tag name first. That's going to do the whole thing. If you don't want to if you don't care about the tag that Selenium finds, you just put an empty space and then start with the filtering process later. To mark what would be a direct child, which means I want a table row that is directly inside the table tag, you just use the right angle. If you want a subchild, which means I don't really care if it's directly inside the table or if it's inside 5 elements that are inside the table. I just want a table cell inside that table. You just use a white space, which is pretty handy. It's what people generally use. For IDs, again, you use the hashbang, hashtag. For class, you use the dot. And for other attributes like name, href, source, or whatever, you just use the square brackets and the final value. Even if the final value has spaces on it, you don't need to quote it. It will just work. Now for filtering by position, which means I want the 5th table row, you can use the column n. That's an interesting thing to discuss because the standard CSS specification says that to do that, you gotta use 2 things. One is nth child, and the other one is nth of type. I personally believe those are super unreadable. I always have trouble figuring out what they mean every time I have to use them. So I was super happy when Selenium moved on to Cecil, which implements this nth thing. John Resig, the creator of Selenium, was like, I don't care about the standard like that. I'm just going to create my end, which is faster and easier to understand. And that's what I'm using right now. Now, if you're going to move to Selenium 2, that's a problem on it that we're going to talk about later. And of course, you can always chain them. So you can say, I want this link that has this class and also has this ID and also has this attribute. You can put as many as you want there. It's all pointing to a single element. Of course, if you want to go down the tree, you just add a space and go to the next description. That will take you down the DOM tree to find the element you're looking for. Something you may not know in Selenium is that if your locator matches more than one element, Selenium will just grab the first. Selenium's way of working is only handling one element per time. You can't tell Selenium, click on all the buttons in the page with a single command. You gotta find all the buttons and say, click the first, not the second, not the third. And it makes total sense, mostly because Selenium emulates the user. And people don't click things at the same time. They just click one, then click another one. So it may be confusing if you're trying to find something. You have the right locator. And when you call it with Selenium, it will click somewhere else. That's probably because there's another element in the DOM that matches the same locator, and it's above that one. So pay attention to that. I'm going to show you some tools later that will help you filtering such situations. Now, these are the powerful parts of CSS, the ones people don't generally know, but they're pretty useful, mostly when you have applications that are not built with testability in mind. And I've been there, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of you have too. Developers just won't add an ID to an element because that takes a week of talking to managers to get it in. So you just try to find your way through that without having to push it. So you have sub-patterns where you can tell Selenium, find the element with this prefix in the ID. You will see that a lot because there's a lot of libraries like ext that will generate random IDs for you. I don't know why that makes sense, but they do it. So the way to generally handle that is just specifying the prefix or a sub-pattern, and Selenium should find it. So you can do, again, prefix, suffix, and pattern in general, which is kind of both at the same time or being in the middle, whatever you want to be more specific or not. You can also do contains for inner text. So if you want to find a div that inside has certain text in it, you should use something like that. I don't really encourage you to do that because that means that the marketing people in your company will be able to break your test. Would be way better if you can just use IDs and things that are not shown to the final user. But as a last resource, I guess you can do it. Another thing to point out that I learned yesterday from one of the guys in the IRC is that you can even use regexes here, kind of regexes. So if you want to find an element that matches exactly this text and not just contains it, you can just do $sign and then the catter thing at the end, as in regexes. Now you can do some other smart things like filtering by not. Something like, I want to find this div, but it doesn't have to have the hidden